Hello, everyone. Very good morning, a very good afternoon, and a very good evening to all of you, wherever you are from. It is so nice to see each and every one of you. Thank you for joining the GSDC Global Summit, CLO Summit 2023. We have a very interesting and incredible panel of speakers for this summit, and we will be having 5 sessions for this week, followed by a panel discussion by 4 of our speakers. So I hope that everyone will join in each of these sessions. So yes, thank you so much again. I am so excited to introduce our speakers and just let you know about what they have in store for us. But before I go ahead to that, please give me some time to introduce our organization, the hosting organization, and the people who made this possible. So yes, starting off with my own introductions, my name is Settle and I will be the moderator for the summit. Um, my colleague my colleague Im Tiranla is on the chat box. If you require any assistance, any questions you have regarding GSDC, you can just ping her and she will guide you through it. Also, yes. Okay, so we will be starting the session soon, but I still have more participants joining in. So yeah, let me go ahead and introduce to you our official media partner. Just want to give a quick appreciation to our official media partner. Thank you so much, World Press Hub, for your continuous support during the marketing of all the summit sessions. We are so grateful to have you. Um, Allow me to introduce our hosting organization, that is GSDC. So yes, we are known as Global Skill Development Council, and we are an independent, vendor-neutral international credentialing and certification organization that has had 50,000 learners find credibility in the top emerging and skill-based certifications. We have over 60 plus certification portfolios and are also very proud to be accredited by ANSI, that is the American National Standards Institute, and ABICB, that is the Accreditation Board of International Certification Bodies. So our certifications are well curated and designed by global industry experts and subject matter experts who are also academic affiliates from top universities like MIT, Yale, Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton. Um, GSDC is also proud to be partnered with over 50 plus global companies. They are our authorized training organizations. So uh, these partners that we have, they add value to the training programs accredited by GSDC. Our ATO partners come from many regions, like the African regions, European regions, APEC, America, from LATAM and Middle East as well. And we are so glad to be a part of their company as well. To learn more about GSDC, do have a look at our website. Link will be shared on the chat box. You can connect with us on LinkedIn as well. Just leave us a message. We'll be happy to connect with you as well. Here, I want to take a quick opportunity to appreciate our TOS partners, supporters, who were so kind enough to share our banners, our summit events to their network. We are so grateful to have them help us sharing the news about this knowledge sharing event to everyone. Thank you so much. Also, yes, thank you to the individual supporters. We are so very apologies for that. However, we are very grateful and appreciate each and every support. Before we start the session with our speaker, just wanted to give a quick brief intro about our CLO GSDC certified chief Officer certification by GSDC. The certificate is a globally recognized certificate and is web verifiable. It has a lifetime validity, and the process for the certification is very simple. You can have a look on our website. The link will be shared on the chat box. You can connect with us as well if you want to go through this part. Also, we have the Learning and Development Professional Certificate. Please do have a look at it as well. We will be very happy to guide you through the part if you would be interested to that. Now, without further ado, allow me to introduce our speaker for today. I'm so honored to introduce him. He is Mr. Allan MacKenzie, who is an assistant professor of leadership and management at the McMaster University. Allan is an established leader with a track record of obtaining extraordinary results with employee engagement and strength-based organizational change. He is a strategist with talent management, training, and organizational development experience at the executive and strategic consulting levels. Allan, we're so happy to have you here. Just before I give you the time, quick information for the audience that we will have a Q&A session after the presentation. So please do save your questions until then. If Allan is happy to take the questions during the presentation, you can definitely feel free to make use of the chat box as well. So yes, Allan, I won't take much of your time anymore now. You can go ahead and take over the screen and start your presentation.
Great, thank you very much. I'm just going to take a second to do a little bit of admin work here, folks, and then we'll get organized. Okay, well, thanks for that introduction. Very nice. And good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I just saw in the chat, people are coming from all over the globe, which is wonderful that you're spending the next hour or so with me in this session, and I very much appreciate that. And I thank you for attending this session, which I titled The N Quotient: How Nature Can Increase Productivity and Human Flourishing in the Workplace. Just to give you just a little bit of background about myself, I've spent most of my professional career as a practitioner, like yourselves, working in and with organizations, leveraging the power of talent to ensure workplaces were engaging and productive. And today, I identify more as what I like to call the reluctant academic, meaning that it's important for me to have access to the academy for research. But what I feel my role is really about disseminating knowledge and guidance to industry practitioners like yourself that we're doing in today's session. So it's my goal to share with you some research benefits into integrating nature and design into employee outcomes. And so that's what our plan is for the session today. I know we've just met virtually, and I know it's kind of an intimate experience here, but I'd like to do a very quick visualization activity with you. I'd like you to just close your eyes for a few seconds and think of a beautiful place. And then once you do that, then what I'd like you to do is quickly type that into the chat, what that location means to you or looks like for you. So just take a second and close your eyes and visualize a beautiful place that's unique to you. And then once you've done that, please type it in the chat. Okay. Right, we've got one up, that's great. Anybody else? Got some interesting ones coming up. Oh, that's nice. Swimming. Lots of trees, Long Beach. at home. Couple more would be great. Got quite a variety here, which is fantastic. It's interesting as people are typing into the chat. There seems to be a lot of folks that are talking about specific areas, such as particular countries, and then more so places that are close to nature or being outside, whether that's the beach, mountains, trees, places that are a little bit away from maybe the sound of what we would call the urban environment, those types of things. It's interesting, I want to pull up another slide and give you an idea. I mean, we're all so different. We're coming from different places, but many of you probably would feel a connection to various things, such as what are framed in this. Some may be more wilderness settings that people chose. I saw people talking about being in the mountains and in the trees. Many people talked about being more in a warmer climate, such as a beach or a lake. Some people even talked about, being at home and being relaxed and playing with your children and interacting with your children. Some talked about what I like to call a little bit more of, kind of tailored nature, such as golf courses and parks and those types of things. It's interesting, that we, so many of us picked these types of unique places. Our brains and our bodies have evolved over tens of thousands of years without buildings. And now we realize that we're at our best when we can recreate the physical and psychological reminders of our most ancient home or our landscape. The one thing I did notice was that nobody wrote down in the chat, spending more time in the office, whether that office is in a building that you go to, or whether it's your office in your home if you're working from home, or a combination of that, of a hybrid type workplace. And it is interesting considering how much time we spend working. And so I think there's a definite need to increase what I like to call the N quotient, or the nature quotient, for all of us. So this connection to the natural world is most prevalent when we're children. And I love this picture, this little girl immersed in the stream, just wholeheartedly enjoying ourselves. And I'd like you to think back, when you were kids, or you're interacting with your kids, kids have a really strong connection to nature, whether that's, playing in the water, or, jumping in puddles, getting all muddy, picking up leaves and bugs. I can remember when I was, 8 or 9, and I lived, we didn't live in a city, we lived on the edge of a town in kind of I wouldn't say it was a wilderness setting, but it was a country setting. And there was a woods that was close to our home that I would walk to. And in the springtime, after the snow had melted and everything else, it was kind of a lowland area where this forest was, and it would flood. And I would always love going there, and I would build all these little dams, and I would try to catch, tadpoles and frogs and different insects. And I would come back and I would be soaking wet and cold and muddy, but I would just be super excited and just as happy as could be. I don't know if my parents felt the same way, having to clean me up all the time. And then, later on, we moved further into the country and beside a lake called the Bay of Quinte, between Belleville and Trenton in Ontario, Canada. And next to our home, there was a cattail swamp. And for folks that have lived by the seaside, you might be familiar with that. And again, as a kid, you know, and with my friends and neighbors, we would play for hours in that swamp. And I have these vivid memories of this. And it's interesting, being an academic, I don't have these vivid memories from being in my classes. So it's interesting that we have this connection back to nature and other forms of life. And this connection is an emerging theory, and I call it emerging, even though it's been around for over 40 years now, known as biophilia. And biophilia, the term stems from the word bio, which is life, and the Greek word philia, which is friendship and affinity. So the love of life. And this term was made and introduced and popularized by a gentleman, Dr. E.O. Wilson, who was himself an amazing biologist, evolutionary biologist at Harvard University. And he really popularized this term. And unfortunately, Dr. Wilson had just left us just over a couple of years ago now, but he lived the ripe old age of 92. And he talked about biophilia as the urge to affiliate with other forms of life. And later he worked with some of his contemporaries, a gentleman named Dr. Stephen Killert, and who is a professor emeritus of social psychology and a senior research scholar at Yale University in the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies. And together they explored these topics in a couple of different books. One was just called Biophilia, and then the seminal book that really brought this to the forefront in 1995 was a book called The Biophilia Hypothesis. And this really is a way about connecting. It talks about our connection that we have back to the natural world. And they explored this concept of biophilia, which is, can we create stronger connections between nature and what we would call the built environment? When I talk about the built environment, I'm talking about, you know, cities, I'm talking about offices, our homes, those types of things. And as I said, the scholarship around this has been, you know, is accumulated. I would say I have 30 years on the slide, but probably closer to 40. But it has really started to take off in the last couple of decades. And there is a great deal of research in this area all across the globe. And I'm going to share some of it a little later on in my presentation with you, a selection of it. But before I do that, what I'd like to do is, one of the things that the late Dr. Kellick and another scholar, Dr. Judith Herwinger, who's a psychologist, a behavioral psychologist, they started to look at the health impacts of buildings and translated this research into practice and tried to come up with a taxonomy to define various types or levels of biophilic design. And they came up so that we could discuss this and kind of have a way to categorize it. And so there's 6 of them in total. The first one is about environmental features, and that's just using, you know, what we would recognize as well-recognized natural world characteristics that are actually built into our built-in environment. This idea of natural shapes and forms. I don't know if you noticed, but in nature, there is not a lot of, you know, squares or rectangles like we build our houses and our architecture. Also looking at natural patterns and processes, the transitions that nature goes through. the play on light and space, and that evokes quite a desired reaction within ourselves as humans. Also, what we call place-based relationships, designing with looking back at cultural and spiritual, ecological connection to our historical landscape. And then lastly, this idea of trying to create things that have what we call awe, or sometimes we call prospect. Prospect is, when we're in a built environment, but we can see for a great distance. This is something evolutionary that really connects with us, because as hunter-gatherers, being able to see a great distance allowed us to see our prey, see if we were going to be prey, would we be attacked? So it gave us some security in those types of things. And what I'd like to do is share with you some visual examples of these 6 categories, so you can start to wrap your head around what these entail and what they can look like. And I've taken in a great range to take us through this. So the GSDC building, which is in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the United States, it was built in 2004, and it hosts hundreds of biotech companies, and hundreds of employees, and as over 900 employees that come in, 400 weekly visitors. And this building was really about trying to create this innovation that allowed light and water and vegetation deep into the interior of this building to enhance worker comfort and productivity. And when the designers were first trying to look at this, I want to share with you a little diagram of their brainstorming that they were going through. And they wanted to kind of take, they had this box, this office building, but then they wanted to say, well, how can we bring in nature and light and air and oxygen, but then allow CO2 to escape, but then put this within the box so that it would be this building that would allow for people to be immersed in a natural environment, even though they were in a building, an office building in the built environment. And so I want to share some interior scenes with you. This is down in the main lobby. And as you can see, you've got lots of windows and natural light flooding in. You've got natural greenery down there in the lobby. And you might be able to see, if you kind of move up into other layers, you can kind of see that. And then it might be a little hard to see in the picture as it is, but I'll show you another one. You can kind of see these little things floating in the sky. And one of the things that designers wanted to do was to emulate when the wind blows outside against trees and leaves wave in the wind. They wanted to try to emulate that within this building. And so what happens, and I think you can see that it goes up, these sort of little metal shards go up, hanging all the way to the roof of the building. And when air comes into the top of the building through the ventilation system, these all move and shimmer. So it gives the impression that beneath the skylight, it carefully filters and disperses this light. And these reflective objects act almost like little mini leaf chandeliers and a light wall. And it helps kind of create that movement that we so much expect when we're outside. And this is a shot of it looking straight up into the skylight from the ceiling. The other thing, you notice that the elevator is a clear elevator that doesn't look into the floor that you're going, but looks out into the atrium, so you can take in this as you're moving up the floors if you decide to take the lift to be able to do this. And so this gives an idea, that people can start feeling the thermal effects, the constant motion, which further enlivens the space for all the occupants within it. To take our next category, this idea of natural shapes and forms. This is the interior of Kruner Hall at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, in the United States. And as you notice, it uses natural materials such as wood, and it has this arcing feeling, which is what we would see in nature. As I said before, we don't see a lot of rectangular shapes. Even when you get closer to the wood, you would start to see, what we call fractional geometries of the wood grain. There's great views outside into the courtyard and the trees. And so this, again, really enhances and satisfies biophilic design needs for students and faculty and staff and visitors to this building at Yale University. And of course, the skylights as well, letting in that natural light. Natural patterns and processes. So, when we look at nature, especially when we look at it even at a microscopic level, if we look at, snowflakes, for instance, I'm here in Canada this morning, and outside my window, I've got lots of snow. I'm just north of Toronto. But, even if we look at trees and trees that we see above the surface, they radiate out with natural patterns for all their branches. Below the surface, they do the same with their root structures. In fact, trees actually communicate, groups of trees communicate through their root structures with each other and can share nourishment with other trees that may not be doing so well. We look at a number of sea animals, and again, we see these different scales. And what I'd like to share with you is we can emulate a lot of these patterns using biophilic design. And so this example that I'm showing you here is a building facade in Paris. And you can see on one side, we've actually, the owners of the building have actually grown a natural wall using real greenery. But then next to it, we can also use, we can employ that direct plants, but we can also employ what we call indirect greenery and biophilic design using masonry and grill work that mimics organic forms. And so what we're trying to do with that is try to achieve the successful biophilic results by not using plants as well to give that opportunity. I want to share another example of this. This is in Tanner Springs Park in Portland, Oregon. And here, we've got this little pond, and then we've got these corten steel fencing. But if you notice, the fencing is at all kinds of weird angles, it's at different heights, and it almost seems like it could even be falling over. And again, what the urban designers are trying to mimic here is these would be like reeds on the side of the pond that would be blowing in the wind, even though these are man-made structures, to give a sense that, there's movement going on. Another one I'd like to share that might be, some of you might be very familiar with is this chapel that is in Japan. And the designer of this really used fractional geometries. And what this designer did was he took the interior and he started to stack what he called a series of tree-like units, starting with 420 milligrams square pillars. And then those, as they moved up into the ceiling of this building, started to get smaller into 90 millimeters, and then finally 60 millimeter. And what he was trying to do was mimic trees. And I'm going to give you a little bit larger photo of what this looks like. And this is the interior of this chapel. And it's interesting the way these 4 pillars and then branching out into smaller ones, much like branches in a tree, can support a roof load close to 25 tons, which is incredible considering, you know, there's no steel in how this is constructed. It's all held up with the wood framing. And when we take a step back and look at it in the evening from the outside, again, it really evokes this sense that we're looking at, even though it is something that has been constructed, it's in an urban environment, it really connects with this idea of biophilic design and mimicking nature and its natural processes and patterns. This is a building that it was closer to home. It's here in Canada. It's out in Alberta, which is a province west of myself. It's probably about 3,000 kilometers away from where I live. And this building is called the Mosaic Center. And it was built as this center for conscious community and commerce. And it was the first building, commercial office building in Alberta, Canada, to receive certification as a net zero commercial building. And it's since been dubbed sort of the crown jewel in construction of triple bottom line, because it captures sustainability, it measures the impact on humans, both the social and environmental capital. And it's been certified by what we call the Living Building Institute. And well, I'm going to take you through some photos of this. And while you're watching the photos, I want you to look at how the light in all its forms starts to kind of move and react in this building, from warm to cool, filtered to diffuse, from inside to outside. And it even sort of going from lighter to darker. And they did this on purpose because when they built this building, it has a narrower cross section to align with an east-west axis to ensure that every space benefited from daylight for the occupants of this building. And so let me take you through some slides of this. First of all, on the roof, there's solar, and the little white boxes that you can see, these are actually beehives. And there is an urban garden there too. And so there is pollinators. And then when you come into the building, again, there's light. You can see the outside from almost every space that you're in. There is very few sort of kind of what we would call solid walls that stop that light from moving through. Even the light shades themselves, they have sort of this fractal geometry that we would see in nature. You know, and as people can move up into the atrium, again, there's a living wall. You can see in the back there. Again, people can walk and move upstairs as opposed to taking an elevator if they choose. So choose. You know, there is a way to diffuse the light if there's too much coming in to make it. So this is a common eating area for people, a communal eating area. And again, this is a better shot of the lighting that they use and the different shapes of these lamps. Again, mimicking what we would see as that fractional geometry that we see so common in the natural world. And then as the light moves through, you know, this would be, you know, early in the morning, there's a lot of light coming in. And then as it comes around to the other side, it starts to kind of dim down a little bit. And then we end up into where we actually see the light becomes much lower. But then inside, we then get this shading that is going on beside, you know, where people can sit and stand. Again, what we would feel when we're outside in nature. So the idea is that we aren't disconnected from the circadian rhythms that are going on within the natural world, even though that we're inside a building, as opposed to being something that is windowless, has fluorescent lights, and you have no idea what's actually going on outside. Is it a cloudy day? Is it a sunny day? Is it warm? Is it cold? This gives you a completely different perspective of that. The other category was this idea of place-based relationships. And the one I want to share with you is the Toiho people in New Zealand. And they of course, like many Aboriginal or First Nation groups around the world, suffered from the hands of colonialism. Here in Canada, our First Nations people have that, the United States, et cetera, and of course throughout Asia and in countries all over the world. And many of these nations are taking back their cultural heritage from the colonialisms of their government. And one of the things that the Toiho people wanted to do was to build an architectural representation of their beliefs, their traditions, and their culture and their history that was built on their ancestral lands. It provides an administration space. There's a cafe. There's a library. There's also artifacts that have an archive for sacred artifacts that they have there. There's a tribal chamber in which they have their own self-government, and then an amphitheater for hosting different events. And of course, it harnesses power from the sun, water. It treats its own waste on site. It has quite, its footprint is very respectful to the land that it's on. It was constructed with trees, pine that was close by. The local earth created the clay for the bricks that it was built out of. And I'm going to take you on the inside of this, beautiful wooden arches. As you move into this example of the solar that they're using to capture sunlight for energy. They also have these interesting ventilating windows that automatically can be opened and closed to let fresh air in and out, the warmer air to move, and then allow colder air to come in place. And there's the cafe that they have. And this is this incredible arch that they built across the front of it as, the display of coming into and this connection back to their homeland and their earth. In the inside, again, there is, this library, as I said before, the learning center where, again, people can interact with the history and the culture of these people. This is the big amphitheater auditorium that they hold a number of events when the weather isn't so great outside. And as you can see, these huge pillars of pine trees that support this. So a lot of wood, so natural materials, which again hits that biophilic design factor. And then this is the arch a little closer up, and you can see some incredible artwork from some of their Aboriginal artists. And then they hold these amazing events out on the front lobby with the building in the background, forming a stage in which people can start to understand more about their particular background and culture. So it's quite unique as a building that evokes that connection back to that culture and historic heritage. The last thing I'd like to share with you is, this category of evolving human relationships with nature. And some of you might have even seen this house. It was built by a very famous architect, a U.S. architect Franklin Lloyd Wright. This is the Kaufman House in central Pennsylvania in the United States, and it's called Falling Water. And this architect, Franklin Lloyd Wright, literally built this house right into the side of the cliff and had the waterfall or the stream come right through and then create a waterfall effect. So it really evokes this idea of what we like to call awe. And where, when you're out in nature and you see something and you're almost, your breath is taken away, you're almost speechless. And we would title that awe. The other idea is, can you create this idea of refuge where even though you're so close to nature, you still feel connected and secure? This idea of affection and attachment back to that natural world. And so this is a really interesting building. It's no longer a private residence. It's now, you can go and visit it. And so if you're ever in central Pennsylvania, in the US, I would certainly recommend you go visit this. It's the picture does not do it justice. It's amazing to be there. And of course, the sounds of the water and that, just emulating up with the moisture and it's oxygen enriched. It's just an amazing place to be. Another one I'd like to share with you is, and that's just a closer picture. And of course, he built this on a fulcrum, so he had to have these huge stones so that it would cantilever over the water, which from an architectural perspective back in the 30s was just amazing. Today, not so much so, but back then was incredible. This is another example. It's called Thorn Crown Chapel in Eureka Springs in Arkansas, again, a state in the United States of America. And I hope you're struck by two things. One is this, immense glass walls and ceilings, and then the fact that it's immersed in a dense forest all around this. And the sort of the thinking behind this, or the dream behind a gentleman named Jim Reed, who was a retired school teacher. He envisioned a glass chapel that would inspire his friends and visitors because he felt that it allowed them to be closer to God in this type of chapel. And I want to share a couple of more photos of this because it is incredible as you start to look at it. This is what it looks like in the evening in the winter months when all the leaves are off the trees. And even in the winter, it still is an incredible experience to be in this chapel. And then when you're on the inside and looking out, again, not only having plants inside the chapel, but also this immersion of the forest around you. Again, so these are all the different categories of biophilic design that we can incorporate into the built environment. And I've just given you just a snapshot of images that I hope helps enrich your understanding of that. And it's great to talk about this, but why go to the effort to design with nature in mind? And one of the biggest reasons, and this is an area of research that I spent a great deal of time in, is this idea is that it makes absolutely incredible financial sense. And if we really look at the cost of our workforce and the buildings that we house them in, most of the costs are related to salaries and benefits. Can even reach up to 90% of building operating costs. Operating the building, such as, energy and rent, make up a really small portion of that. And these stats, they're a little over 10 years old, but they, I like this diagram because the stats really haven't changed much. Certainly pricing has gone up for square footage, but the overall breakdown of cost is really related to our workforce. So if we can do anything to help make our workforce happier, more enriched, more engaged, more productive, we're going to gain much more benefit from that as we move through that for an organization that can serve our organization internally as well as their clients and their customers. And so what could be a relatively inexpensive building or renovation can have, multifold increase in productivity for the workforce. And I want to share some research. I mentioned this at the beginning of how biophilic design can impact workforce outcomes, because that's why many of us are here this morning and this afternoon and this evening. So I want to share with you a few studies. And as I said earlier, the research in this area has been around for about 40 years, and it really has taken off over the last 2 decades. But I want to share with you some interesting studies that will help you understand the impact of biophilic design on workforce outcomes. The first one is this psychological effects of forest environments. And you might have heard the expression forest bathing. And that's where we go out and we immerse ourselves in the forest, and we take in the sounds of the forest, the smells of the forest, and we try to be still and take that information in. Well, a number of researchers in Japan wanted to look at the physiological effects of this on our nervous system. And so it took 12 male university students, and what it did was 6 were sent to a forest area, and another 6 were sent to a city area on the first day. And I'll give you some images that you can have a look at. And what they had to do was they just had to literally just walk around in this area in the city and sit for 15 minutes or so to take this in. And then the participants who were in the forest environment did exactly the same. And then afterwards, they measured their heart rate variability, their blood pressure, their pulse rate. They looked at their cortisone levels, etc. And then they switched them and back and forth. So the ones that started in an urban environment went to a forest environment and vice versa. And what the researchers discovered was that the pulse rate and blood pressure decreased to quite a low frequency when significantly lower in a forested area. They also had less release of cortisone, which is a stress cortisone that our body produces. And so there was clear physiological measurements or attributes to being in a forested environment as opposed to an urban environment, and started to relax people's bodies and minds. And this theory, and has been tested multiple times to come up with similar results, is what we call attention restorative theory, ART for short. And it really is about how we can use nature as a restorative methodology to reduce stress, increase health promotion, reduce the incidence of disease. Many doctors now in North America are actually prescribing to their patients to spend more time in nature as an outcome, rather than prescribing certain types of anti-stress or anxiety prescriptions or drugs. So it's interesting that it's starting to hit even into the mainstream healthcare field. This is some research that was done looking at daylighting and more about views, what views people had outside their windows. And this was at the University of Oregon, and researchers found in this certain building that people who could see out and look at a natural environment, the top picture that you see, and again, it's basically just some trees and grass, but there's very few man-made structures. That was a view that some of them had, and then others had a view that was more to the street and cars and more man-made structures. Yes, there was a few trees there, but it was much more what we would see as man-made structures. And then they did a cross-section of the employees, and they found that the absences of people who could see outside to a more natural environment was 10% less than people who were looking out at more of an urban environment. And so they looked at sick leave hours and the views and the lighting, et cetera. And so that, if we think about having a good view and better lighting, that can have an impact on absenteeism, preism, all of these things that can impact the productivity of our workforce. And of course, can impact insurance ratings as well. And so some of you say, well, this is nice, Al, but I work in an urban environment. I can't go for a walk in the forest. Outside my window, I don't see any trees. My office at McMaster University is exactly that. I'm in a glass building, and my office looks out onto a main road. I don't see any sort of natural environment. So how can we mimic this without actually being out in nature? And so this was some research that was done with students and at the University of Melbourne. And what they did was they had students, rather than going out in nature, just looking at images of nature. And they were have to do this task where they had to repeat a number of numbers flashing on a computer screen, and unless that number was the number 3. And so some cognitive load that was happening. And then they were given a 40-second break midway through the task, and they were given a scene that was either one of these two different scenes. They were either given a scene of looking at a rooftop that is a traditional rooftop, the top photo there, just a flat roof with some gravel on it, or they were given a scene of the same rooftop, but with a rooftop garden on it. And after that 40-second micro break that the students had, they then had to go back into their task. And what they discovered was that the students who had that micro break looking at an image of a rooftop garden had much higher cognition. They made less errors in the second half of the tasks, as opposed to the students that were looking at a traditional roof. And that was just an image. It wasn't actually a real roof. So you can imagine the opportunities that exist when we think about our office towers and looking out at buildings that are lower in nature, and the opportunity to put rooftop gardens on top of them, not only to attract birds and pollinators, insects, etc., but just even to have those images for other office workers looking out at these images can be incredible as we move through this. And so I hope this demonstrates that you can get biophilic impacts and results with really short bursts of insights that doesn't necessarily mean you're immersing yourself in nature. And neuroscientists have continued this research, and they put people into MRI machines, and then they present them with various scenes independent, and then these patients have to elicit a response to these, and they look at whether it lights up their parohippocampus cortex, which of course is something that is seen whether something is it fight or flight. Is it something that we're being connected to, or do we want to run away from? And so they give them all these different images. Some are very urban in nature. Some of them are, looking at animals and natural settings. And again, the evidence shows that, a positive impact for having non-rhythmic sensory stimulus on occupant heart rate, blood pressure, sympathetic nervous system. The other big part is the ocular stress that we feel. When we're looking at something that's stressful, our eyes kind of tighten in. It can create, over time, even looking at our computer screen can be issues with that as well. And we start to, almost get, we can get headaches and fatigued. And again, that can impact our cognitive ability. And so many organizations have started to build in this breakdown of sensory so that we're not looking at the same thing within buildings to allow our eyes and the muscles around our eyes to relax. You know, this is an example of little pods that Google has put in their Zurich office. And again, this is an example of their Dublin office. Again, to break up the rhythm, you're not looking at just straight lines and, you know, white walls or gray walls with just fluorescent lighting. A couple more examples I want to share with you. This was some research that was done by, you know, not what, you know, wouldn't be sort of this, you know, Sacramento municipality utility company. You don't think of them, utility companies, being necessarily innovators. But what they were trying to measure was, you know, people working inside these buildings, could they, if they had a view to the outside, and it didn't need to be direct, even if they had a peripheral view, did it enhance their productivity? And they absolutely found that it did. It increased their averaging call handling time by 6 or 7%. So when people were seated in cubicles, but low wall cubicles where they could see outside and see the light from windows, even peripherally, they weren't looking directly at it. And so what they found was that, you know, by just changing the internal structure of the building and the seating arrangements, you know, they just by rearranging the workstations, they ended up saving on average close to $3,000 within 4 months based on the increased worker productivity that they got out of that. So again, it's not that you have this wonderful corner office with beautiful windows looking out in nature. You can even do it when you're in a more internal space, even having peripheral vision to the outside, as well as natural light coming in. Oops. And the last study I want to leave you on is one of the studies that really got this started. And this was a study by Roger Urich, and many of you, many of you on this call are on the HR training and learning space. We know Roger is, you know, a seminal researcher, and he was really interested in recovery rates. And this was at a Pennsylvania hospital, and patients who had gallbladder surgery. And when they were in their recovery, the views they had outside their windows. And so some had views, and I'm going to show you a diagram. It's a very kind of a simple diagram. I'm going to bring it up here. You know, some of them had a view outside their window just looking at a brick wall, where other ones had a view looking out into the hospital garden and greenery. And one of the things he noticed from this research was that, first of all, the patients that were in recovery that could look out at greenery, they didn't stay in the hospital as long in recovery. They didn't need to take as many painkillers, and their interaction, the nursing staff noticed their interactions with them was much more pleasant and less aggressive than those looking out at a wall when they're during the recovery. And I just want to, you know, take you for yourself, just imagine that you're looking at this for yourself, and you know, you've had this illness or you've had this surgery and now you're recovering and you're sitting on your bed, and first of all, you've got to sit up to even see out. But you're looking at this sort of brick wall or another building across the street. What kind of impact that would have on your recovery? And the healthcare field is one of the areas that have really embraced biophilic design to take things to another level, because the research has really supported better patient care and recovery, which of course is what that industry is all about. And so imagine you were about to undergo surgery and you came into this operating theater, you know, before you were put under, but you know, you'd be looking out the windows and seeing those trees. You know, it would help reduce your anxiety and your stress rate. your blood pressure would start to drop. Your stress hormones would be reduced. I'm not saying they would be gone 100%. You know, you're about to undergo surgery, and that can be a difficult anxiety-producing time. But the idea, can we bring that down a little bit before we start this? Here's another example of a patient room at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston. And again, in your recovery, be able to, in this case, they got the bed the wrong way around, but, you'd be able to look out your window, and even people who are visiting you, friends and family, their stress rate would come down. And of course, having that connection with you as they're visiting you. I want to share, another healthcare example a little closer to home where I am in Toronto, Canada. This is a hospital called Bridgeport Hospital. And it's a hospital that is about recovery and looking at things. And this is the way they designed their patient rooms. And this is a room it's up a few floors. But one of the things I want you to notice is the windows. They're much lower down. In fact, one is all the way to the floor level. Because when you think about it, many of the times when you're in a hospital, you're in a bed, you're not able to move around. And so if you look to the side, if the window is elevated, you can't see out from that. You get light coming in, but you can't see out. This way, you're able to look at the scenes. And of course, the Bridgeport Hospital is next to the Don River parkade, and it has these beautiful, as you can see, tree canopy in the distance. And they tried to do this at all levels of the hospital. This is down on the first floor, where they have this recovery pool where patients can do exercise using aquatics to build back their muscles and their joints and their ligaments. And again, being able to clearly see outside, even though they're in an interior environment as they're moving through this. This is the roof of the building. And so again, it's got a rooftop garden. There's pollinators up there, bees and insects and birds. Patients and staff can come up and enjoy some time up there. They can visit, they can, share a meal. And again, with a bit of protection from the wind with the glass, but have the views. And you can see, they can look at 360 degrees, but even then, they got the tree canopy. And then in the distance, you see what would be the core of downtown Toronto. And I don't know if in the center of the photo, you can see there our iconic CN Tower. And so this really gives an opportunity to help create a buffer against stress of being in the hospital in this environment. And last one I want to share with you is this building that's in the United States, again, the S.C. Johnson Administrative Building. And again, this was designed by the architect Franklin Lloyd Wright way back in the mid-30s. And Franklin Lloyd Wright was using biophilic design principles before they were really started to look at and researched. He had this innate connection to nature. And so what he tried to do in this internal environment was to make something reminiscent of the savanna forest with these big pillars, almost like big shade trees that diffuse the overhead light, and also created a balcony further up that people could look out. And this, was built, close to, almost 90 years ago. And the workers that are still using this building find this quite satisfying. So this is interesting that this has lasted close to 9 decades of this architectural design from an internal working environment. So if you'd like to learn more about this, and one of the studies I would recommend you look up is called The Human Spaces, the Global Impact of Biophilic Design Global Workplace Report. And this was done by completed by an organizational psychologist, Dr. Sir Henry Carey Cooper, who's out of the UK. And why I'm sharing this with you, it's a seminal study because they looked at thousands of different employees in multiple countries all over the world. In the United Kingdom, Germany, all through Europe, United States and Canada, into Asia. So it's quite a cross section. And it's a relatively new piece of research. It was done in 2015. And what they found was that what people really responded to was really key in their well-being. To give you a breakdown of kind of the work, the research study was that close to 60% of the respondents fell in the 25 to 44 age category. 40% of them were working, between 40 to almost 50 hours a week. And only just shy of 40% felt that they were productive in the workplace. So that's a huge gap. We've got, if only 40% are feeling productive, what about the other 61% of the employees? That is lost money for organizations. And some of the things that people said that they felt made them more productive based on the survey was, when they were in environments that had more natural sunlight coming in and greenery, that they, 15% of them felt a higher level of well-being. They felt, more creative. And out of that, just having natural sunlight and greenery, but they were more productive in those environments. And when they questioned employees what they wanted in their workplace settings, in their built environment settings, number one was more natural light coming in. That was the biggest one going. Less artificial light and more natural light. The fact that some indoor greenery, some plants that were in the inside environment. Spaces that they could work quietly, not in a cubicle in an open environment where they could hear other people on the phone or typing on your keyboard or people having conversations, quiet spaces for working. Number 4 is an interesting one, views by the sea. And it's not necessarily that they had to see the ocean, but some sort of water feature was important for people. And then the other one, which is quite interesting, is just to have brighter colors within the environment, inside environment. And we think about many of our office spaces, they're painted sort of, straight on white or beige. My office space at the university is a kind of a grayish blue. It's actually quite distressing. It's not the greatest color. And I've been lobbying the university, showing my research for close to 3 years now to see if I can get my office painted similar to the colors you see here in my home office, that is much more towards a natural environment, much more enlightening that way. Oops, one of the things, so one of the things that I am not expecting that, you've sat in this call and this meeting and you're going, okay, you're going to go back to work and meet with your CEO, tomorrow or next week and go, hey, let's start knocking down the walls and, let's do some biophilic renovations to our office space. I'm not saying that isn't a great idea, but that's going the extra mile to do that. But I want to share with you some simple takeaways of what you can start to do that is not that hard and not that expensive, that you start to get the benefits of bringing nature, the N quotient, into your work environment. So you can just even start with, rather than bringing real nature in, just images of nature, whether that's through photographs that you put up on the wall. It can be even artwork that looks like nature. I don't know if you see some of it behind me on my camera, on my wall. Some of it is related to more Aboriginal or First Nations artwork. You can even put this on, if you spend most of your time on your computer, you can build this into having natural settings on your screensaver. This can give you an impact to have you part of that research talking about micro breaks. Even that 40-second micro break can happen. This is one I think almost everybody should have in your office, and what I like to call is a personal touchstone bowl. And you, as you're out in the natural environment, collect things that mean something to you, little rocks or pebbles. You can also, pick up, if you're in more of a northern setting, you can pick up pine cones, acorns, other seeds. You can pick up leaves, and could be seashells if you're on the beach, could be feathers that you find along the way that have dropped off birds, and place them in this bowl. And what it allows for is throughout your workday, if you have this bowl close to you, or if you take your little micro break, you can just pick up these objects and hold them for that tactile experience of being connected back to nature. I have one of these in my office, and when I'm meeting with students, especially if they're anxious about maybe an assignment that's coming up, or a grade they've received, or an upcoming exam, I recommend that they pick the objects up that are in the bowl. And I've got all kinds of things in there: acorns, pine cones, rocks. I've got these seashells, etc. And in fact, many times, without even, I've got a little sign, please play in the bowl. And many times, I may be finishing up a call or something like that, or I'm looking something up on my computer, and I look over and the student is just automatically starting to play with the items that are in the bowl. And again, that goes back to our playful experience, and it helps kind of reduce their stress a little bit and their anxiety. It sounds so simple, but it's quite powerful. Another one, of course, is, if you can go back to, your facility folks and see if you can bring some greenery into the office, whether that's plants, whether it's, installing a green wall, that's going a little bit further, but it also helps not only from an image perspective, but it helps filter harmful toxins and pollutants from the air. Even bringing in, if you can't bring in plants, even if you bring in flowers every now and then, if you can't bring in fresh flowers, bring in dried flowers or dried grasses or sticks. Again, in my office at the university, I have this pillar of dried sticks in the corner. Again, because I'm not in an area that would grow anything very well, I tried to grow some plants in my office, and unfortunately, where the light hits and everything else, and the heating and cooling system, they just don't survive. So I've gone to drier grasses to make that happen. Another thing I would recommend, if at all possible, is when you're having meetings with employees, don't sit in your office, don't sit in a meeting room. If you can go out, especially if you're meeting with one or a couple of people, go for a walking meeting. Even if you can't get into a park setting, even just, a quieter street, walking around outside. This encourages, you're out in the natural light. The fact that we're moving, we've got our blood flowing through our body, that can help with increasing, this from sitting, that your creativity, your divergent thinking, reaching consensus is a little bit easier to do this. Even if you can't go outside and have a walking meeting, even if you're inside, remove your office chairs and have stand-up meetings. First of all, you'll find your meetings will be shorter. People are more alert than if they are sitting in a chair and playing on their tablet or on their phone. It helps evoke that energy to help to make the meeting more productive. Get out a paint can and just start, see if you can get permission from your facility people to even paint an accent wall that's closer to something the color of nature, just to break it up a little bit. Again, from that idea of prospect and awe, that it just breaks up our sensory stimulus. You can also get themed wallpaper that you can put up there. this is theme wallpaper that's looking at the core of a tree. Again, making that connection. And you can see even the chairs and the pillows and the those side tables, again, all have natural elements that are built into that. To again, that makes it a little bit softer furnishing. And again, you're kind of using this symbolism to kind of trick yourself to help relax and incorporate nature into that process. If you're really interested in diving in deeper about biophilic design and wellness in the built environment, I'm going to recommend you look at two organizations. The first one I would recommend is what we call the International Well-Built Institute. It's based out of the United States, but it is a global institute. And it has a number of elements that it looks at in indoor environments to help increase the wellness and productivity of workforces. So it's looking at the air and the water. Do people have access to good food and nourishment, lighting, of course, that we've been talking about, places where people can get up and interact and move, fitness. Just thermal comfort. I don't know about you, but many people, you go into their office, and even though we have central air conditioning or heat, they have their own little heaters or their own little fans because the central heating isn't as effective. And just things of biophilic design that we've been talking about. And you don't have to do all of these, but it gives you a framework that what can you focus in on, and then you can have what we call a well-certified building or office. And again, this becomes a great attractor to bringing new employees into your enterprise, retaining the employees that you have. And of course, we talked about from a financial perspective, anything that we can do to enhance connection with employees from a motivation, connection, as well as engagement and wellness will move through and help with productivity, which of course is what organizations are looking for. Another organization that takes this to even a greater level is what we call the the International Living Futures Institute. And they have what they call the Living Building Challenge. And so they're not only looking at biophilic aspects, but they're also looking at things to do with energy and health and the materials that have gone into the building. And again, the site that it's on, does it make use of that site, as we were talking about, from a cultural perspective, et cetera. And this is based on not model data, but actual data of the performance. So you build in a lot of these features, and then over time, this gets measured to see if you achieve the standard. And I'd like to share with you just quickly, and I'm cognizant of my time here, of a center, two different centers, both of them in Canada. This is out in the west coast of Canada, in British Columbia. This is at Sir Simon Fraser University, one of the major leading universities out in Vancouver. And this is their childcare center, and it's received from the Living Futures Institute what they call PETAL certified. And so, it's almost a 6,000 square foot facility. It hosts children, over 50 children, ranging from 3 to 5 years old. And it was, and it builds in this idea for children to explore water, light. They're outside, you can see they're playing in that aspect, and vegetation. They're able to take in the seasonal changes that are going on within this building. Another one that I'd like to share with you that's also PETAL certified for place and energy and healthy materials is the Botanical Garden Visitor Center, again in Vancouver. And again, it's built right into the ground earth, and then it has these amazing skylights that let in this natural light when you're in there. But this is the top of it, in which you can walk around on top. It has this living roof. You can see the shapes are there, and it has this native orchard that is in place, and it encourages people to kind of connect with this. The local pollinators and birds and even deer have come onto this roof. So it's really an interesting building. It's got geothermal boreholes, so it brings in that natural heat. Of course, it's got solar, and it's got these hot water tubes, and so it's also achieved a net zero energy on an annual basis. So these are some examples of organizations that have taken this to the kind of the amazing degree of bringing in many biophilic features to incorporate into their buildings. If you're getting excited about this, a website that I would direct you to that's hosted and sponsored by Interface Flooring is called humanspaces, all one word, .com. And this is an online space that's dedicated to biophilic design and exploring how the built environment affects our health and well-being. So this is a great resource that keeps you up to date. And of course, you can subscribe to their blog and get updates on this information. The other thing is there is a wealth of, as I said, research that's happened. And I'm not saying you have to dive into academic research, because sometimes that's a little challenging it's not a light read generally, but there's been lots of books written about this on biophilic design. As I mentioned before, Dr. Stephen Kelhart, who's no longer with us any longer, but when he was a professor of social ecology at Yale, he wrote a number of books on biophilic design. The seminal one called Biophilic Design. He talked about buildings for life. One of his last books he wrote was Nature by Design. This is an amazing book. The former CEO of the Living Futures Institute, Amanda Surgeon, she wrote a book on creating biophilic buildings, and she is now the CEO of what's an organization called Built by Nature, which is a network and grant-making fund that will be accelerating this mission for timber building transformation in Europe and in the UK. And this is just a handful. There are other ones too. And of course, if you're interested, please email me. I'll share that with you in a second. I'd be happy to share a number of resources with you. So this is bringing me to a close to my presentation, and I'm going to open it up for questioning in a second. And so what I'd like you to kind of think about is, how are you going to move forward with the biophilic design agenda, as I like to call it, in your firm to try to create more measurable key employee outcomes such as well-being, productivity, and creativity. And I want to leave you with something that, as a takeaway, that you can use, and quite frankly, we haven't been using it in this meeting, and I call it the 20 by 20 by 20 rule. And what you should do, especially many of us, and I fall victim to this, I spend a lot of screen time staring at my computer, working in front of my computer. What I would challenge you is to, every 20 minutes of screen time, set a timer, and then look away for 20 seconds of time after that 20 minutes, and look at a visual stimuli that's a distance that's 20 feet or more away. So you may, maybe your office is big enough that you can look out at something. Maybe you can look out a window, or maybe you can look down a hallway. It doesn't have to mean that you're looking at nature. If you can, that's great. But what will happen is, when we're looking at our computer screens, and we almost do it, our computer screens are anywhere from, 1 to 3 feet away from us. Our eyes start to become rounded, they contract, and they become fatigued. And of course, we get eye strain and discomfort. And then, of course, the more we do that, it depletes our productivity. And so you may not even notice this. It's kind of almost unconscious, but you're taking your glasses off, you're rubbing your eyes, These are all things that are starting to happen to you. So, set this up on your phone or on a little timer on your computer. And I would challenge you to try this for a couple of days, and it will start to become habit forming. Set that timer for 20 minutes. And then after that 20 minutes, look away for 20 seconds away from your screen at an object, a visual stimuli that's at least 20 feet away. And that will help recover your eye stress. And then afterwards, go back to your screen and continue your work, and and then do it again. So within an hour, you're going to do this 3 times. Okay? It seems like a lot, but it's amazing the benefit that you get out of it. So that brings my talk to a close. I thank everyone for your time and attention. This is my contact information. I'm at McMaster University, which is in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, just a little west of Toronto, for any people who want to know. We're an international research university. And there's my email address there as well. You can find me on LinkedIn or Twitter, are my 2 social media channels that I use. I am not on Facebook. I'm just on these 2 social media channels. So please reach out to me if you have, further questions after the talk. We're going to open it up here in a second. I'm always interested, looking at firms to partner about research, or you're interested in this expanding field. If I can help you out in some way, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. So that's the end of my slideshow, and I'm just gonna end the show, and I'm gonna bring it back to the screen, and I'm gonna stop my screen, and I'll open it up for any questions that people may have, as in the last few minutes and things like that. Thanks for all the comments in the chat. Very much appreciated. Excellent.